The screech of tires still echoes in my nightmares, but it's what came after that truly shattered me. I woke up in a pool of my own blood on the asphalt, my vision blurry, the acrid smell of gasoline mixing with the metallic tang of blood filling my nostrils. Through the haze of pain, I heard my father's voice, cold and calculating, not a trace of concern in it. He wasn't worried about his daughter lying broken on the street. He was worried about his insurance premium. "Don't call 911, Frank barked at Mark, the driver who had hit me. "An ambulance and police report will make my insurance rates skyrocket. Just drive her to that community clinic downtown. If she dies, at least it'll be cheaper." I tried to move, to speak, to tell them I was conscious and could hear every word, but my body wouldn't respond. My stepmother Susan appeared in my limited field of vision, looking down at me with disgust rather than concern. "See, Frank? I told you. She's always been nothing but trouble." My stepsister Ashley stood at a distance, her phone held up, recording the entire scene. Not because she was worried, not because she wanted to document evidence for help. She was capturing drama for her social media. If you're listening to this story and you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been treated as less than human by the people who were supposed to love you, please hit that like button and subscribe. This story gets darker before it gets better, but I promise you, there's hope at the end. Drop a comment and tell me if you've ever had to walk away from toxic family members. Now let me take you back to how I ended up on that blood-stained street, and how the worst night of my life became the catalyst for my rebirth. My mother died when I was 6. A drunk driver ran a red light while she was at the grocery store. She never came home. Frank fell apart for months, leaving me to fend for myself, a small child making crooked sandwiches and wearing dirty clothes, too scared to make noise in case I lost him too. 11 months later, Susan arrived. Blonde, polished, perfect. She brought casseroles and organization and slowly brought Frank back to life. They married when I was 7. I thought I was getting a new mother. I was wrong. Susan came with Ashley, a golden-haired 4-year-old who got the master bedroom while I was moved to the small office at the end of the hall. It started there, that first signal of where I ranked. Then, my mother's photos came down from the walls. Susan said they made Frank sad. My mother's garden was dug up and replaced with rocks. The flowers she used to weave into my hair were thrown away like trash. By the time I was 10, every trace of my mother had been erased. Worse, every trace of me was fading too. The family photos on the mantle were Frank, Susan, and Ashley. I appeared in maybe 2 out of 20 frames, always on the edge, always out of focus, like I was already disappearing. I learned that usefulness was survival. I did dishes without being asked. I vacuumed every Saturday. I helped Ashley with homework despite being 3 grades ahead. By 12, I had a daily chore list. By 13, laundry was added. By 14, I cooked dinner 3 nights a week while Frank came home and kissed Susan and Ashley, walking right past me like I was furniture. My 14th birthday, he forgot entirely. 3 months later, Ashley got 20 kids and a country club pool party. I got a grocery store cake Susan grabbed on her way home from yoga. High school should have been escape, but every interest I tried to pursue was blocked. Soccer team? Someone had to watch Ashley after school. Art club? Ashley needed rides to dance class. Every door I tried to open, Susan shut with some obligation that only I was expected to fulfill. The worst part wasn't the chores. It was being made to feel like a burden for existing. New shoes because mine had holes? Susan sighed about the cost while buying Ashley 3 new outfits. I needed money for a school trip? She'd hand it over while mentioning how tight things were, though Frank had just bought new golf clubs. At 15, I started working at the grocery store, lying about my age. Every dollar I earned was supposed to be my escape fund for college. But Susan always needed help. First it was the electric bill, just this once. Then the water heater. Then Ashley's dance competition fees. Every time, Susan cried and promised to pay me back. Every time, she reminded me I lived under their roof, ate their food, that helping was the least I could do. By 17, I'd given them over $8,000. My college fund had $500 left. When I finally asked about being repaid, Susan looked genuinely confused. "You don't expect us to pay back money you contributed to the household, do you? That would be like charging rent to your own parents." That was when I understood. I was never getting out. Every dollar I earned would disappear into their pockets. Every plan I made would be destroyed by some emergency that only I was expected to sacrifice for. I was trapped, and they knew it. Worse, they counted on it. Then came October of my senior year, and everything fell apart in a way I never could have imagined. Ashley had started dating a college guy named Brett, someone she'd met at a party. He was 22, drove a nice car, and seemed to have plenty of money despite not appearing to have a job. Susan loved him because he came from a wealthy family. Frank tolerated him because Susan liked him. I thought he was bad news, but no one asked my opinion. One Friday night, Brett was supposed to pick Ashley up for a party. Ashley had been getting ready for 3 hours, leaving the bathroom a disaster that I'd be expected to clean up later. Brett texted that he couldn't make it, some excuse about his car breaking down. Ashley had a complete meltdown. She screamed and cried and threw things. Susan tried to calm her down but couldn't. Finally, Frank said he'd drive Ashley to the party himself, but he'd been drinking, which he did most Friday nights. Susan didn't drive after dark because of her night blindness, which was really just an excuse for her anxiety. That left me. I had just gotten home from an 8-hour shift at the grocery store. My feet hurt. I was exhausted. I had homework to finish. But Ashley was sobbing, and Susan was giving me that look, the one that said I was being selfish if I didn't help. So I agreed. I drove Ashley to the party, which was in a neighborhood I didn't know well. The whole drive, Ashley complained about Brett standing her up. She didn't thank me for driving her. She didn't ask how my day was. She spent the entire 20-minute drive on her phone, texting and scrolling through Instagram. When we got to the house, Ashley jumped out without a word and disappeared inside. I sat in the car for a moment, deciding whether to wait or go home and come back later to pick her up. Then my phone rang. It was Susan, asking if I could pick up some milk on the way home because we were out. Not, "Thank you for driving your sister." Not, "Are you okay driving home alone in an unfamiliar neighborhood at night?" Just an order to pick up milk. I drove to the nearest grocery store, bought the milk, and started heading home. It was raining, that cold October rain that makes the roads slick and the streetlights blur into halos. I was at an intersection, waiting for the light to change. The light turned green. I checked both ways out of habit, then started to cross. I never saw Mark's SUV coming. He ran the red light going at least 50 miles per hour, his eyes on his phone instead of the road. His vehicle hit the driver's side of my car and spun me like a top. My head cracked against the side window. The airbag deployed, slamming into my chest and knocking the wind out of me. Then everything went still. When I came to, I was partially out of the car. Someone had pulled me from the wreckage. There were people everywhere, voices overlapping, someone saying an ambulance was coming. My leg was bent at an angle that wasn't right. Blood was running down my face from a gash on my forehead. Every breath hurt. A woman knelt beside me, holding my hand. She was crying and telling me to stay awake. That help was coming. She kept saying she'd seen everything, that the other driver had run the red light, that it wasn't my fault. Her kindness made me want to cry, but I was in too much shock. Then I heard someone shout, "That's her father!" And the crowd parted. Frank was there. Someone must have called him. For just a second, I felt a wave of relief. My dad was here. He'd make sure I was okay. He'd ride with me to the hospital. He'd hold my hand and tell me everything would be fine. Frank didn't come to me. He went straight to Mark, who was standing by his SUV, pale and shaking. Mark was clearly in shock, stammering apologies and saying he'd call 911 immediately. That's when I heard Frank's voice, clear and cold in the rainy night. "Don't call 911. An ambulance and police report will make my insurance rates skyrocket. Just drive her to that community clinic downtown. If she dies, at least it'll be cheaper." The woman holding my hand gasped. Someone else said, "You can't be serious." But Frank wasn't joking. He pulled out his wallet and started counting bills, his movements businesslike and efficient. Susan arrived then, having driven after all despite her supposed night blindness. Ashley was with her, more interested in her phone than in me bleeding on the ground. Susan took one look at me and shook her head. "See, Frank? I told you. She's always been nothing but trouble." Ashley raised her phone and started recording. "This is wild," she said to her camera, her voice excited. "My sister just got hit by a car. The car is totally wrecked." The woman holding my hand looked between them and me, her expression horrified. "You people are her family?" she said, her voice shaking. "What is wrong with you?" Susan turned her cold gaze on the woman. "This is a family matter. I suggest you mind your business." Several other witnesses started arguing with Frank and Susan, saying they were calling the police anyway, that this was insane. Frank's voice rose. "She's my daughter, and I'll decide what medical care she receives. Mark here is going to take her to get treated. Everyone else needs to back off." Mark looked like he might be sick. His hands were shaking as Frank shoved money at him. "But sir," he said, "she needs real medical attention. Look at her leg. This is serious." Frank moved closer to Mark, his voice dropping to a threatening tone. "You caused this accident. You were on your phone. You ran a red light. Do you want to deal with police and lawyers and lawsuits? Or do you want to handle this quietly, take her where I tell you, and we all walk away without this getting more complicated?" I tried to speak, to say that I needed an ambulance, but my voice came out as barely a whisper. No one heard me. The rain was getting harder. I was so cold. Mark finally cracked under the pressure. He agreed to take me to the clinic. The witnesses were furious, several of them on their phones calling the police despite Frank's protests. But Frank, Susan, and Ashley got in their car and left before the police could arrive. They just drove away, leaving me bleeding on the wet pavement with a driver who looked like he was about to pass out. Mark and another man carefully lifted me into the back of Mark's SUV, laying me across the seat. The woman who'd been holding my hand wrapped her jacket around me. "I'm calling the police," she said firmly. "This isn't right." But Mark was already driving, following Frank's directions to a clinic on the south side of town. The woman's jacket smelled like lavender. I focused on that smell as we drove, trying not to think about the pain in my leg or the way my father had just calculated whether my life was worth the cost of an insurance claim. The clinic Frank had sent me to was exactly what you'd expect from a place he'd chosen based on price rather than quality. The building was run down, the waiting room packed with people who'd clearly been there for hours. There was a smell of disinfectant trying and failing to cover other, worse smells. The fluorescent lights flickered. A TV in the corner played a game show with the sound too loud. Mark half carried me inside into the front desk. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, barely glanced up. "Insurance card and ID," she said automatically. Mark stammered through an explanation. There'd been a car accident. I needed help. She needed to see a doctor right away. The receptionist's eyes finally focused on me, taking in the blood on my face and the way my leg was dangling uselessly. She sighed and pushed a clipboard across the desk. "Fill out these forms. Someone will be with you when we have an open room. The wait is approximately 3 to 4 hours. 3 to 4 hours? I was bleeding, possibly seriously injured, and I was going to wait 3 to 4 hours. Mark looked panicked. He asked if there was any way to expedite this, if they could see how serious this was. The receptionist gave him a look that said she'd heard it all before. "Sir, everyone here thinks their situation is urgent. We're severely understaffed. Your friend will be seen in the order she arrived unless she's actively dying." Mark helped me to a chair in the waiting room. He tried to fill out the forms, but he didn't know most of my information. He didn't know my insurance details. He didn't know my date of birth. He didn't even know my middle name. I tried to help, but the pain and shock were making it hard to think. The room kept tilting sideways. I must have passed out because the next thing I knew, I was lying on a gurney in a hallway. There was no clock visible, so I had no idea how much time had passed. My head was pounding. My leg was screaming. I was so thirsty my tongue felt stuck to the roof of my mouth. A young doctor appeared, looking as exhausted as I felt. He introduced himself as Dr. Martinez and started examining me with quick, efficient movements. He asked what had happened. I told him about the car accident, my voice coming out scratchy and weak. He ordered x-rays, which meant a long wait for a wheelchair, then a longer wait for the x-ray room to be available, then being jostled and moved in ways that made me bite my lip to keep from screaming. The x-ray tech was gentle but hurried, apologizing for the wait while explaining they only had one machine working, and it had broken down twice already that day. Back in the hallway, Dr. Martinez returned with my x-rays. His expression was grim. My leg was broken in 2 places. I had a concussion. I needed surgery to properly set the bones in my leg, physical therapy afterward, and monitoring for the head injury. This clinic wasn't equipped for any of that. "You need to go to a real hospital," he said. "I can call an ambulance." That's when a nurse appeared with paperwork. She told Dr. Martinez that my parents had been there while I was getting x-rays. They'd signed forms refusing transfer to another facility and declining any treatments beyond basic stabilization. They'd also left contact information. Dr. Martinez looked at the forms, then at me, his expression darkening. He stepped away to make a phone call. When he came back, he looked furious. "The phone number they left is disconnected. The address they gave doesn't exist. Your parents left false information and disappeared." He showed me another paper. It was a note, handwritten, on a piece of paper torn from a notebook. I recognized Susan's handwriting immediately. "Don't come home until you can pay back the debt you've caused this family." The debt. I had been hit by a car through no fault of my own, and somehow I was in debt. Dr. Martinez sat down on a rolling stool next to my gurney. "Chloe, I need you to understand something. What your parents did is not okay. It might actually be illegal. But right now, my hands are tied. They have legal authority over your medical decisions until you're 18, and they've signed papers refusing the care you need." "I'm 18, I managed to say. "I turned 18 in September." His expression shifted. "You're 18. You're a legal adult." He stood up quickly. "That changes things. You can make your own medical decisions. Do you want me to call an ambulance to transfer you to a proper hospital?" I wanted to say yes, but then reality crashed down on me. A hospital stay, surgery, physical therapy. I had no insurance. The $500 I had left in my bank account wouldn't even cover the ambulance ride. I'd be buried in medical debt before I even started my life. "I can't afford it," I whispered. Dr. Martinez closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were full of anger and pity. "I'm going to do what I can here. It won't be enough, but it's something." He spent the next 2 hours setting my leg as best he could without surgery. He used an older splinting technique that he admitted was outdated but all they had available. He stitched the gash on my forehead himself, his hands steady despite his obvious frustration with the situation. He gave me painkillers from a sample supply, explaining that I wouldn't be able to afford a prescription anyway. Before he let me go, he wrote his personal cell phone number on a piece of paper and pressed it into my hand. "If you need anything, call me. I mean it. What they did to you, it's not right." I thanked him, though my voice was barely audible. A nurse brought me a plastic bag with my bloody, torn clothes inside. I changed into them slowly, each movement agony. The clinic gave me crutches and a set of instructions for caring for my injuries that I barely had the focus to read. It was almost dawn when I hobbled out of that clinic. Mark had stayed the entire time, sleeping fitfully in the waiting room. He jolted awake when he saw me and immediately offered to drive me home. Home. The word felt hollow. I had no home. The place I'd lived for the past 11 years had never really been my home. It had been a house where I was tolerated as long as I was useful. And now I wasn't even that. I was expensive. I was trouble. I was debt. I gave Mark the address anyway. I told myself that maybe it had been a misunderstanding. Maybe in the harsh light of day, Frank and Susan would realize how wrong they'd been. Maybe they'd apologize. Maybe there was still a chance to salvage something from the wreckage of this family. I was wrong. Mark pulled up to the house around 7 in the morning. The sun was just coming up, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed offensive in their beauty. Everything hurt. The painkillers were wearing off. I just wanted to lie down in my own bed and sleep for days. Frank was in the driveway, washing his car. His precious luxury sedan, the one he'd bought last year over Susan's token protests. He spent every Saturday morning washing and waxing it, treating it with more care than he'd ever shown me. He looked up when Mark's SUV pulled into the driveway, his expression instantly hostile. I got out of the car slowly, nearly falling when my crutch slipped on the damp driveway. Mark rushed to help me, but Frank was already walking over, his jaw set in that way that meant he was angry. "What are you doing here?" Frank said, not to me, but to Mark. Mark looked confused. "I'm bringing your daughter home from the clinic. Sir, I really think she needs to see a proper doctor. The clinic didn't have the resources to treat her correctly." Frank's eyes flicked to me, then away, like I was something unpleasant he didn't want to look at. "I'll handle my daughter's medical care. You need to leave. Now." Mark hesitated. "But sir, she's injured. She needs help getting inside." I said leave. Frank's voice was hard and final. Mark looked at me, clearly torn. I managed to give him a small nod. He'd done enough. More than enough. He'd stayed with me all night, dealt with my father's cruelty, driven me around when he was probably traumatized from causing the accident in the first place. I couldn't ask him for more. Mark got back in his SUV and drove away slowly, watching in his rearview mirror. I stood in the driveway, leaning heavily on my crutches, waiting for Frank to say something, to ask how I was, to express even the smallest amount of concern. Instead, he went back to washing his car. I hobbled toward the front door. Each step was agony. The crutches dug into my armpits. My broken leg throbbed with every heartbeat. I was dizzy from the concussion and exhausted from being awake all night in that miserable clinic. The front door opened before I reached it. Susan stood there, blocking the entrance. She was already dressed and made up despite the early hour, her blonde hair perfect, her expression cold. "What are you doing here, Chloe?" The question was so absurd I almost laughed. Where else would I go? "I live here," I said. "No," Susan replied, her voice as cold as her expression. "You don't. Not anymore." Frank had finished with his car. He walked over, still holding his washing sponge, water dripping onto the driveway. He reached out, and before I could react, he grabbed one of my crutches and yanked it away from me. Without the support, I stumbled, nearly falling. Only grabbing the porch railing saved me from hitting the ground. "You don't have anything here," Frank said, throwing the crutch across the lawn like it was trash. "Your room's been cleared out. We're renting it to a college student to help cover the bills you've caused." The bills I'd caused. Not the bills from the accident that wasn't my fault. The bills from existing. The bills from being alive when they'd apparently calculated it would be cheaper if I wasn't. "I just need my things," I said, hating how my voice shook. "My clothes, my documents, my mother's photo." Susan laughed, actually laughed. "The photo of your mother? I threw that out years ago. As for your clothes, we donated them. You won't need much where you're going anyway." Ashley appeared behind Susan, dressed in her pajamas with her phone already in hand. She was recording again, a smirk on her face. "Oh wow, this is even better than last night. The rejected daughter returns. This is going to get so many views." She came closer, shoving the phone in my face. "How does it feel to be thrown out by your own family, Chloe? Do you feel sad? Mad? Tell my followers how you're feeling." Something inside me snapped. Not into rage, but into clarity. These people weren't my family. Family doesn't abandon you bleeding on the street. Family doesn't calculate the cost of your life. Family doesn't mock your pain for social media views. "Get that camera out of my face," I said, my voice steady despite the pain. Ashley just laughed and moved closer. "Make me." I looked at Frank. "I want my mother's belongings. The box of her things that was in the attic. You don't get to throw away my mother." Frank's expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're talking about. There's nothing of hers left." He was lying. I could see it in the slight twitch of his eye, the way he wouldn't quite meet my gaze. Susan had probably demanded he get rid of everything years ago, but Frank was a hoarder. "He never threw anything away. That box was somewhere in this house. I want to look for it," I said. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "You're not setting foot in this house," Susan said. "You're trespassing. Frank, call the police." Frank pulled out his phone, and I realized he would actually do it. He would call the police and have his own daughter arrested for trespassing at the home she'd lived in since she was 7. The home she'd cleaned and maintained. The home she'd helped pay for with money that was supposed to be for her future. "Frank," I said, using his first name for the first time in my life instead of calling him Dad, "please, just let me have my mother's things. Then I'll go and you'll never see me again." For just a second, something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or discomfort. But then Susan put her hand on his arm and the moment passed. Frank went into the house and came back with a small cardboard box. It was barely bigger than a shoebox. He dropped it on the porch with a thud. "This is all you're getting. Take it and leave before I call the police." I managed to retrieve my thrown crutch from the lawn, then picked up the box. It was so light. 11 years of my life reduced to a box that weighed maybe 5 pounds. Inside, I could see a few random items. A paperback book I'd loved in middle school, an old school project, a stuffed animal, nothing of my mother's. Nothing of real value. "This isn't everything," I said. "It's all you're getting," Frank replied. He was already turning away, eager to be done with this scene. "If you're still here in 5 minutes, I'm calling the cops. And Chloe, don't come back. Ever." Ashley was still recording, her phone following me as I turned to leave. "Say bye to your family, Chloe. Don't forget to smile for the camera." I walked away from that house with a broken leg, a concussion, a small box of worthless items, and exactly $500 to my name. I didn't cry. I was too shocked, too numb, too exhausted to cry. I just kept walking, one agonizing step at a time, until the house disappeared from view behind me. I had nowhere to go. No friends close enough to impose on, especially not in this condition. No other family, since my grandparents had died before I was born and my mother had been an only child. No money for a hotel, and even if I did, I'd burn through my $500 in days. I ended up at a bus stop 3 blocks from the house. I sat down on the bench, carefully propping my broken leg up, and tried to think. The morning sun was warm on my face, but I was shivering. Shock, probably. Or the concussion. Or just the reality of my situation finally sinking in. A bus came and went. Then another. I didn't get on either of them because I had no idea where I'd go. The driver of the third bus, an older black woman with kind eyes, leaned out her window. "Honey, you okay? You need to get to a hospital?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "You got somewhere to be?" I shook my head again. She sighed, then pulled the bus over and got out. She came and sat next to me on the bench. "I got 10 minutes before I need to start my route. You want to tell me what's going on?" And suddenly, I was crying. Not gentle tears, but huge, gasping sobs that made my ribs hurt and my head pound. The bus driver, whose name tag said her name was Gloria, put her arm around my shoulders and let me cry. She didn't ask questions. She just handed me tissues from her pocket and made soothing sounds. When I finally got myself under control, I gave her the abbreviated version. Car accident. Family threw me out. Nowhere to go. Gloria listened with an expression that grew increasingly angry. "Your daddy said it would be cheaper if you died?" Her voice shook with fury. "That man needs Jesus and a reality check in that order." She looked at her watch, then at me. "Look, I got to drive my route, but here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna get on this bus. You're gonna ride with me to the end of the line. And when we get there, I'm gonna take you to the community center where my sister works. They help people in tough situations. You hear me?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Gloria helped me onto her bus, and I rode the route with her for 3 hours, watching the city go by through the windows while Gloria called out stops and helped passengers. At the end of her shift, true to her word, she drove me to a community center on the east side of town. The community center was a plain brick building that had seen better days, but inside it was clean and warm. Gloria's sister, Patricia, was a social worker who took one look at me and went into action mode. She got me into a small private office, assessed my injuries, and started making phone calls. Within an hour, Patricia had arranged temporary housing at a women's shelter, scheduled a follow-up appointment at a free clinic, and connected me with a lawyer who did pro bono work. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Jennifer, listened to my story and immediately wanted to know about the accident. "The driver who hit you has insurance?" Jennifer said. "That insurance should cover your medical bills at least, and possibly more, depending on circumstances. Can you get me the police report?" But there was no police report. Frank had made sure of that. There were witnesses, but I didn't know who they were or how to find them. I didn't even know Mark's last name. I had nothing but my story and the inadequate medical records from that miserable clinic. Jennifer saw my despair and put her hand over mine. "Don't give up yet. If there were witnesses, the police might have reports filed by them even if your father tried to avoid it. Let me see what I can find." I stayed at the women's shelter for 2 weeks. It was a roof over my head and food in my stomach, which was more than I'd had, but it was also temporary. The shelter had strict time limits. I needed to find work and housing before my time ran out. Finding work with a broken leg and no transportation was nearly impossible. I filled out applications at every place within walking distance on crutches, which wasn't many. Fast food restaurants, retail stores, offices. Everyone told me they'd call. No one called. I was starting to panic. My time at the shelter was running out. I had $200 left after buying some basic necessities. I was going to end up on the street. Then, 3 weeks after the accident, I was sitting outside a 24-hour convenience store called Chen's Market, trying to figure out my next move, when an elderly Asian man came out carrying a bag of trash. He looked at me, sitting there on the curb, looking pitiful with my crutches beside me, and stopped. "You hungry?" he asked in accented English. I was always hungry lately because I was trying to make my money last. But I shook my head automatically. Pride, or shame, or some combination of both. He disappeared back into the store and returned with a sandwich and a bottle of water. "You eat," he said, setting them next to me. "You too skinny. Eat." The sandwich was from the store's deli counter, fresh and substantial. I ate it slowly, trying not to cry from the simple kindness of it. The man, who told me his name was Mr. Chen, watched me eat with satisfaction. "You need job?" he asked when I'd finished. I looked up sharply. "Yes, but I'm injured. I don't know what I could do." Mr. Chen gestured to the store. "I need help night shift. Restock shelf. clean, sometimes customer service. You can do? Night shift meant I could work sitting down when needed. It meant I wouldn't have to walk far because the store was on the bus route Gloria had shown me. It meant income. Yes, I said. I can do that. Mr. Chen nodded. You start tonight. I pay cash. Also, storeroom and back. You can sleep there until you get apartment. Not supposed to, but I don't care. You need place, you have place. I started crying again, but this time from relief and gratitude. Mr. Chen looked alarmed. Why crying? Job bad? No, I managed to say. Job is good, thank you. Thank you so much. Mr. Chen patted my shoulder awkwardly. You work hard, we both do good. Come, I show you storage room. The storage room was exactly that. A small room in the back of the store filled with boxes of inventory. Mr. Chen cleared a space and brought in a folding cot and a blanket. It wasn't much, but it was mine. It was safe. It was somewhere I could lock the door and know I wouldn't be thrown out. I started working that night. Mr. Chen was patient, showing me how he liked things organized, where everything was stored, how to work the register. The night shift was quiet mostly, with occasional customers coming in for late-night snacks or early morning coffee before work. I threw myself into the job with desperate determination. This was my lifeline. I couldn't mess it up. I reorganized the stockroom by categories, making it easier to find inventory. I deep-cleaned the store shelves, scrubbing away years of dust and grime. I memorized product locations and learned to anticipate what would run out when. Mr. Chen noticed. He started asking my opinion on orders. He showed me how to read the sales reports. He taught me about profit margins and supplier negotiations. He treated me like I mattered, like my thoughts were valuable. 2 months into working at Chen's market, Mark appeared. I was restocking the cooler when I saw him through the glass doors. My heart jumped into my throat. What was he doing here? Had Frank sent him? Was there more trouble? Mark saw me and his face went pale. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. He came into the store and stood there, clearly struggling with what to say. Chloe, he finally said, I've been looking for you everywhere. I stayed behind the cooler doors, keeping the barrier between us. Why? Because I can't sleep, he said, his voice cracking. Because what your father said, what he did, it's been eating me alive. Because you didn't deserve what happened and I've been trying to find a way to make it right. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands. That night, after your father paid me to take you to that clinic, I recorded our conversation. I was scared he'd try to blame me for more than the accident. I wanted proof of what really happened. My breath caught. You have a recording? Everything, Mark said. Your father telling me not to call 911. Him saying if you died it would be cheaper. Him paying me to cover it up. Your stepmother's comments. All of it. He held out his phone. I've been carrying this for 2 months, not knowing what to do with it. But then I found you. And I think you should have it. I think you need it. I took the phone with trembling hands and pressed play. Frank's voice filled the quiet store, cold and calculating. Don't call 911. An ambulance and police report will make my insurance rates skyrocket. Just drive her to that community clinic downtown. If she dies, at least it'll be cheaper. Then, Susan's voice. See, Frank? I told you. She's always been nothing but trouble. The recording was damning. It was proof of everything. It was evidence of abandonment, of neglect, of callous disregard for my life. It was the key to everything. Mr. Chen had come out from the back office during this. He'd heard the recording. His expression was thunderous. This is your father? He said to me. This is how he treat you? I could only nod, tears streaming down my face. Mr. Chen looked at Mark. You give her this recording. Is good thing you do. Then he looked at me. Chloe, my son is lawyer. Good lawyer. You need to talk to him. I didn't know if I could face going after Frank and Susan legally. They were still my father and stepmother, even if they'd treated me terribly. There was still a part of me that had been trained for 11 years to put their needs first, to not cause trouble, to be grateful for crumbs. But then I remembered lying on the street, bleeding and in pain, while they drove away. I remembered the fake contact information they left at the clinic. I remembered Frank throwing my crutch across the lawn and telling me I'd caused bills by being hit by a car. I remembered Ashley recording my humiliation for entertainment. Okay, I said, I'll talk to your son. David Chen was nothing like his soft-spoken father. He was sharp, intense, dressed in an expensive suit that contrasted with the humble convenience store where his father worked. He arrived the next day, listened to my story, and then listened to Mark's recording 3 times. This is gold. he said finally. Absolute gold. Chloe, do you understand what we have here? I shook my head. David's eyes blazed with determination. We have evidence of willful neglect and abandonment. We have evidence of deliberate denial of necessary medical care. We have evidence of emotional abuse. And best of all, we have it in their own words. He leaned forward. We're not just going after Mark's insurance company for the accident. We're going after your father and stepmother for damages. Damages? I repeated weakly. Emotional distress, loss of financial support, punitive damages for their deliberate and callous behavior. Chloe, we're going to take them for everything they have. The thought terrified me. I can't afford a lawyer. David waved that away. Contingency basis. I only get paid if we win. And we're going to win. The evidence is too strong. They'll settle before we ever see a courtroom. Over the next week, David laid out the strategy. We'd file a lawsuit not just for my medical expenses, but for abandonment and emotional abuse. We'd use Mark's recording, the clinic records, the fake contact information, and witness testimony from the people who'd been at the accident scene. David had already tracked down 3 witnesses through police reports that had been filed despite Frank's attempts to avoid them. The goal is simple, David explained. We're targeting their most valuable assets, their house, your father's retirement accounts. We'll force them to either settle or face the publicity of a trial where that recording plays for everyone to hear. I signed the papers with a hand that shook so badly I could barely hold the pen. I was doing this. I was suing my own father and stepmother. It felt like jumping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below or rocks. The next 3 months were a blur of legal proceedings, paperwork, and waiting. David filed the lawsuit. Frank and Susan were served. According to David, they'd initially laughed it off. They probably thought I was bluffing, that I'd back down, that family loyalty would win out. They didn't know me anymore. Or maybe they never had. Their laughter stopped when their lawyer heard the recording and saw the evidence. David told me their lawyer had called him immediately and strongly advised settling. The case was a nightmare for them. The recording alone would destroy them in court. No jury would sympathize with parents who'd abandoned their injured daughter because it was cheaper. But Frank was too proud to settle immediately. He wanted to fight. He thought he could win, or at least avoid paying too much. That was his fatal mistake. He came to Chen's Market on a Wednesday evening. I was behind the register, organizing lottery tickets, when the door chimed and he walked in. I froze. We hadn't seen each other since that morning he'd thrown me out. Frank looked terrible. He'd lost weight. His clothes hung off him. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man being crushed by stress. "Chloe," he said, and his voice cracked on my name. "We need to talk." Mr. Chen appeared from the back room like a protective guardian. He stood near me, saying nothing, but his presence was clear. I wasn't alone. I had protection. "There's nothing to talk about," I said, proud of how steady my voice was. "Please," Frank said, and hearing him beg was surreal. "You have to drop this lawsuit. You're destroying our lives." "Like you destroyed mine?" The words came out before I could stop them. Frank flinched. "I made a mistake." I panicked. "But Chloe, you're my daughter. Family forgives. Please, you have to drop this." Susan appeared behind him then, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "Chloe, please. You're ruining us. Frank lost his job. Our friends have abandoned us. Ashley has left us. Everything is falling apart." Ashley had left? I filed that information away for later. Right now, I needed to stay focused. "You should have thought of that before you left me bleeding on the street," I said. "You should have thought of that before you told Mark it would be cheaper if I died." Frank's face went white. "You don't have proof of that." "I have a recording," I said. "Mark recorded everything." The devastation on Frank's face would have been satisfying if I wasn't so numb to all of this. Susan grabbed his arm, her tears coming faster. "Frank, do something. Make her stop this." "I can't make her do anything," Frank said dully. "She's not a child anymore. She's destroying us." Susan's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "Everything we've worked for, our home, our savings, our reputation, all because she can't let go of one mistake." One mistake. She called abandoning her injured stepdaughter one mistake like it was a minor error in judgment. "You need to leave," I said. "Both of you. Now." "Chloe, please." Frank tried again. "I'm begging you. I'll do anything." "You can't do anything," I said. "You already did everything that mattered. You showed me exactly who you are. Now I'm just making sure there are consequences." Mr. Chen stepped forward then. "You leave now. You not welcome here. You not welcome near Chloe. Go. Frank looked like he might argue, but something in Mr. Chen's expression made him reconsider. He and Susan left, Susan still crying, Frank looking like a broken man. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. The settlement conference happened 2 weeks later. David had insisted I dress professionally, so I wore a navy suit I'd found at a thrift store and altered to fit. My hair was pulled back in a neat bun. I looked like a young businesswoman, not the broken girl Frank and Susan had thrown away. They looked terrible. Susan's designer clothes couldn't hide how thin she'd gotten. Frank's face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. They both looked 10 years older than when I'd last seen them. For just a second, I felt a pang of guilt. These were real people whose lives I was destroying. Then I remembered the recording. If she dies, at least it'll be cheaper. The guilt evaporated. Their lawyer laid out the settlement offer. They would sell the house and give me 70% of the proceeds, approximately $300,000. Frank would also transfer 60% of his retirement accounts, another $100,000. The total was $400,000. In exchange, I would sign a non-disclosure agreement, agree not to pursue further damages, and the case would be sealed. David looked at me, his expression carefully neutral. This was my decision. It's a strong offer, Chloe. Better than we might get at trial. It's your choice. I looked across the table at Frank and Susan. They looked diminished, destroyed, desperate. Susan was crying again, but I'd seen her fake tears too many times to be moved. Frank just looked empty, like something essential had been hollowed out of him. A year ago, I would have felt sorry for them. I would have been the one trying to fix everything, to make everyone feel better, to sacrifice myself to ease their pain. But I wasn't that girl anymore. That girl had died on a rainy street corner when her father calculated the cost of her life. I accept the settlement, I said. Susan let out a sob. Frank closed his eyes. Their lawyer started gathering papers, relief evident on his face that this was finally over. David collected his copies of the documents. We all stood to leave. I was at the door when Frank reached out and grabbed my arm. His grip was weak, nothing like the strength he'd had when he threw my crutch across the lawn. You took everything from us, he whispered. Everything we worked for, everything we had. You destroyed your own family. I looked at his hand on my arm, then into his eyes. I pulled free slowly and deliberately. No, Frank. You destroyed the family when you left me bleeding on the street and told Mark it would be cheaper if I died. I just made sure you paid for it. I paused at the door and turned back. By the way, those exact words? They're in the recording that convinced your lawyer you'd lose at trial. You might want to remember that the next time you try to rewrite history. I walked out of that conference room with my head high. David was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. Mr. Chen, who had insisted on coming for moral support, squeezed my shoulder with pride. Behind me, I heard Susan sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't look back. The settlement money came through 6 weeks later. $400,000. More money than I'd ever imagined having. I could have spent it recklessly, indulged in revenge shopping, blown it on luxuries. But I'd learned too much about the value of money, about how quickly it could disappear, about how security mattered more than luxuries. I bought Chen's market from Mr. Chen. He'd been talking about retiring, and I'd been thinking about having a permanent place, something that was mine. The store became my foundation. I threw myself into running it, improving it, expanding it. I also invested carefully. I bought a small condo, nothing fancy, but mine. No one could throw me out ever again. I put money aside for emergencies. I started a retirement account. I took business classes at night school, and I started something that mattered more than any of it. I created a small charitable fund to help young people who'd been abused or abandoned by their families. Nothing huge at first, just enough to pay for temporary housing, job training, legal consultations. I partnered with social workers like Patricia and lawyers like David to create a network of support. Every person I helped felt like healing another piece of myself. Every time I saw a scared kid who'd been thrown out by parents who were supposed to love them, I saw myself at 18, and I made sure they didn't have to sleep in bus stops or endure what I'd endured. I never saw Frank, Susan, or Ashley again. I heard through the grapevine that they'd moved to a small apartment across town. Frank worked part-time at a hardware store. Susan cleaned houses for the same wealthy friends who used to invite her to country club brunches. Ashley had come back briefly, discovered there was no money left, and left again to chase some influencer dream in Los Angeles. Part of me wondered if I should feel guilty. I'd contributed to their downfall, after all. But then I'd remember being 18, injured, and homeless while they lived comfortably in a house I'd helped pay for. I'd remember Frank casually discussing whether my death would be more convenient. I'd remember Susan's disgust and Ashley's mockery. No, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. 3 years after the settlement, I opened my second store location. Mr. Chen came to the grand opening, beaming with pride. David brought his wife and new baby. Gloria, the bus driver who'd first helped me, showed up with flowers. Mark, who'd stayed in contact over the years, came with his girlfriend. I stood in my new store, looking at all these people who'd helped me when I had nothing, and realized something profound. This was my real family. Not the people connected to me by blood or marriage, but the people who'd shown up when I needed them. The people who'd seen me at my worst and helped anyway. The people who'd valued me when I couldn't value myself. 5 years after that terrible October night, I was walking through downtown on my way to check on my fourth store location. The scar on my leg had faded to a thin white line. I didn't limp anymore. I walked with confidence, with purpose, with the stride of someone who'd survived hell and built something beautiful from the ashes. A young woman approached me, nervous but determined. She introduced herself as someone who'd received help from my fund after her parents had kicked her out. She was in college now, studying social work, wanting to help others the way she'd been helped. She thanked me with tears in her eyes. We talked for a few minutes about her plans, her dreams, her future. She asked how I'd found the strength to help others after what I'd been through. I help others because I know what it's like to be completely alone. I told her. I know what it's like when the people who are supposed to love you prove they never did. And I know that surviving that doesn't make you weak, it makes you a warrior. She hugged me tight, thanked me again, and walked away, wiping her eyes. I continued my walk, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. If someone had told that broken 18-year-old girl bleeding on the street that 5 years later she'd own multiple businesses and be helping other survivors, she wouldn't have believed it. But here I was, thriving, happy, free. The family that was supposed to love me had taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. You don't owe anyone your suffering. Not your parents, not your siblings, not anyone. When people show you who they really are, believe them. And when staying means destroying yourself, leaving is not abandonment, it's survival. I built my legacy not from the family I was born into, but from the family I chose. Mr. Chen and David became my real family. Gloria and Patricia and Jennifer and Mark became my people. The young people I helped through my fund became my purpose. The life I created on my own terms became my triumph. Frank had once told Mark that if I died, at least it would be cheaper. He'd wanted me to disappear quietly, to stop being expensive and inconvenient. Instead, I survived. I thrived. I became someone who mattered, who made a difference, who turned pain into purpose. And that was the best revenge of all. Here's what I want you to take away from my story. If you're in a toxic relationship, whether with family or anyone else, please know this. You are not obligated to sacrifice yourself on the altar of other people's selfishness. You are not required to light yourself on fire to keep others warm. And cutting off people who hurt you is not cruelty, it's self-preservation. Some families are bound by love. Others are bound only by biology. And biology without love is just DNA, nothing more. Choose yourself. Choose your healing. Choose your future. The people who truly love you will never make you question your worth. They will never abandon you when you need them most. They will never calculate whether your life is worth the cost. And if your family has made you feel worthless, invisible, or burdensome, I want you to know something. They're wrong. You matter. Your life has value. Your story deserves a better ending than the one they wrote for you. So write a new ending. Take back your power. Build your own legacy. That's what I did. And if I can do it, so can you. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to walk away from family members who were toxic? Have you ever been made to feel like you owed your suffering to people who didn't deserve your loyalty? Drop your story in the comments below. Let's build a community of survivors who became warriors. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you hope or validation or just made you feel less alone, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of people who chose themselves and never looked back. Because sometimes the family you choose is so much better than the family you were given. And sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is walk away from people who never valued you in the first place. Your worth isn't determined by people who couldn't see it. Your future isn't limited by people who tried to crush it. You are more than their cruelty, their neglect, their selfishness. You are a survivor, and your story is just beginning.